And then, according to the people of precision, he has to know where judgments can be found without the condition of having memorized the actual text. So the ulama say that he doesn't have to memorize all the hadith. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that if I say, oh, well, alhamdulillah, then I've got my collection of Bukhari, my collection of Muslim, my collection of Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, all these things, then can I go and do these things because memorization is not? No. You have to have studied each one of those books with a hadith master and have isnad and ijaza and know which is the correct dabt, because there's different dabt in the hadith. In other words, al-Bukhari, there's different riwayat that have different ashkal and things like that, and you have to know that. So you can't just buy the books. The books have to be authenticated. Like in India, where they still maintain hadith tradition, they have authenticated, certified editions of the books that are then read with a scholar. The book, they still transmit them with absolute certainty of their transmission. And then he says, and above all these, of all these that we've just mentioned, he has to be a middle-ranked mastery. In other words, he has to be a master and of middle stature. He can't be like average. He has to be a master, which is above average, and amongst the masters, he has to have middle. In other words, he can have some middle stature in his mastery. But he has to be a master, which is not average. It's above average. He has to know those matters where there's ijma'. So there's ijma'at. So he has to know where everybody's in agreement. He must know things such as the condition of a single hadith, the ahad and the mutawatir and the aziz. He has to know the mashhur. He has to know when a hadith is ahad, because that has a hukm, as opposed to a hadith that's mutawatir, as opposed to a hadith that's aziz. They have different ahkam related to them. Furthermore, he has to know the abrogated and the abrogating. Ibn Wahb, who's one of the strongest men of Imam al-Bukhari and a master of hadith, he said he memorized so many hadiths, he became completely confused and was worried for his own deen, that he was going to go astray, until he came to Imam Malik radiallahu anhu. And then he would relate the hadith to Imam Malik, and he would say, da'a hada, khudh min hada, da'a hada, hada mansukh, hada muqayyad. You know, he would tell them, this hadith, yufassiruhu, this hadith. And he went through all the hadiths until, khalas, he knew what was valid and what was no longer valid to follow. Right? And that's why Ibn Uyayna said the hadith is mudalla. It's a place where people go astray, except for the people of fiqh. They're the people. Even al-Bukhari was not a faqih. There's some debate about that. He generally follows the tabweeb of the fuqaha, but he's not considered a faqih. He was not a mujtahid. Despite the fact he memorized all those hadiths, he was not, and if you look, he's not interpreting the hadith. Rare exception, he makes some ta'liq, but generally he's not. He's a transmitter. And then he has to know also under the conditions which the verses were revealed or the hadith. So there's what's called asbab al-nuzul and asbab al-wurud. Asbab al-nuzul relates to the ayahs. He has to know what the circumstances were when the ayahs were revealed. Asbab al-wurud means he has to know what the circumstances in the hadith. When did the Prophet ﷺ say the hadith? Because that relates to understanding the hadith in its context. And you'll be amazed when you see, because many of the hadiths don't have the asbab al-wurud in them. When you read books that have the signs of asbab al-wurud, suddenly the hadith makes sense in a way that it didn't make sense before. Guarantee you. And it's just extraordinary to see that. And then Muhammad Illish, great scholar from Al-Azhar, was asked once. Now, this is, I think, the key to this whole point that Murabba al-Hajj is making. So after he tells you all this, he says, now, consider all of the above mentioned, rahimakallah, may Allah have mercy on you. Think about what he's just said. Because this is agreed upon, these conditions. This is not... And you see for yourself whether your companion, in other words, whether the person saying, no, you have to follow the book and the sunnah and not the imams. See for yourself whether he's characterized by such qualities and fulfills these conditions. And then Murabba al-Hajj says, and I highly doubt it. More likely he is just pointing people to himself in his demands that the people of this age take their judgments directly from the book and the sunnah. كَمُسْتَدِلًا عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. He's saying, look at me. Now, that's getting into the psychology of why people do things, right? Which is, it's a painful thing. to really look at what are our motivations and why are we doing things and what is this about. The Arabs say, خالف تعرف. Go against the grain and people will point at you. Right? Be a maverick and people will point at you. Sayyidina Ali once was in a masjid in Kufa, and there was a qassas there. And the Sahaba hated the qassasin. People that used to tell stories, that were fabrications. They were like embellished stories. And some of them were very effective, the qassasin. Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi says on his way to, I think it's Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi, on his way to Medina, he said that there was a qassas with them. He was a young man. He said he used to get up after every prayer on the journey. They were going to Medina, and he used to tell these stories, and he'd have everybody weeping. And he said that the people were very affected by him. And when they got to Medina, he got up after the prayer, and he started to tell his story, and the little children in the mosque threw sandals at him and told him to, be quiet. And he was stricken by, he said, what's going on? What? And he looked at one of the men from Medina, and he said, if the little children hadn't done that, we would have been forced to do it. We don't have qassasin in the masjid of the Prophet. We don't have these people in the masjid. This is a place to learn the deen. Right? And so the Sahaba didn't like qassasin. One man was telling a story, and Sayyidina Ali wasn't listening to him. He was talking to his people. And one of the men said, أَتُعْرِضُ عَنْ هَذَا? And he looked over at the man and he said, هَذَا الَّذِي يُنَادِي أَعْرِفُونِي أَعْرِفُونِي. This guy over here who's saying, look at me, look at me. That's a painful analysis, right? In other words, look how clever I am, look how... That's what he's pointing out, that there's just ego. That's all we're dealing with. It's just raw ego here. And there's a man I know, Muhammad Abu Bakr, he's from Ghana, and he's a very, very interesting scholar. But he told me once, I was at this conference, and he said, for me it's painful to see so many people that are just really just displaying their pathology in public arenas. I mean, there's a difference, right, between activism and action. Right? There's a big difference between the two. Activism, and I'm saying this as a former activist, activism is often nothing other than working out your own psychological problems in a public arena. So if you're angry, you begin to justify your anger by using objects of your anger which are justifiably objects of anger. But the reason that you're attacking them is not because you're really indignant about those things. The reason you're attacking them is because you're angry as an individual, and you want to justify your anger, so you direct it at objects of anger. I mean, this is what they call sublimation, right? Sublimation. You sublimate your pathology and find some socially acceptable arena, right, to display it. And people were doing it all the time, and it's very sad. And this is why you have to have tazkiyah. That's why the foundation of our deen is tazkiyah. You have to purify the self. When the man asked the Prophet ﷺ, who's the mujahid fi sabilillah? Who's the mujahid? And that's a very important question. Who is the one really struggling for the sake of Allah? And the Prophet ﷺ said, first he told him who wasn't the mujahid, right? The one that's fighting to be called brave is not a mujahid, right? The one who's fighting to be called brave is not a mujahid. The one who's fighting for some worldly gain is not a mujahid. The one who's fighting because he's just angry, and he wants a social outlet for his anger. People that want to go kill people. Who then is the mujahid? The one who struggles in order that the kalimah of Allah is paramount. That's the mujahid. There's no ulterior motive there. And that's why one of the first people to be thrust into the fire is the so-called mujahid. when Allah says, what did you do with your life? He said, I struggled in your way. He said, you're a liar. You went out and fought to be called a brave man. And you got your reward. In other words, people said you were a brave man, and that's why you did it. So, you get your reward. So that's what he's saying. Look at what's going on. What's the underlying thing here? Why is this person doing that? Because our tradition is simply based on just saying, I don't know anything. And admitting that fact. And then just saying, I'm going to follow people who know. Simple as that, right? Rumi's story about the three fish, right, in the lake, when the fisherman comes, and the first fish says it's time to head for the ocean, and he sets out on the journey. The second fish says, he's the most intelligent fish in the lake, and if he's going, I think I should go. And he tells the third one, come on, let's get out of here. The third one says, no, that's a big lake. Don't worry about it. And he takes off, and the third one gets caught by the fisherman in the net, and then he's put in the frying pan, and then in the frying pan he says, if I ever get back to the lake, I'm heading for the ocean. Right? So Rumi says that, the first one are the prophets. They're the ones that head for the ocean. And the second are the people who are intelligent enough to follow the prophets. And the third are the people that in the fire, they're the ones saying, لَيْتَنِي لَمْ أَتَّخِذْ فُلَانًا خَلِيلًا. Would that I didn't take so-and-so. It's too late. Right? So we follow. That's what we are. We're followers. We're atba'. We're people who follow. So he says, what do you say in this thing, Muhammad Ali? He says, what do you say about somebody who says that he follows the Quran and the Hadith, and then he says about people who follow the Imams, I say Allah and His Messenger say, and you reply Malik says, and Ibn al-Qasim or Khalil says, and it's interesting, this is 100 years ago. So things haven't changed. This is a recent thing. It's only 100 years old. This movement is only 100 years old. And that's it. 100 years ago, we still hear this. It's like a direct quotation of what a lot of people now say. I say, Allah and His Messenger say, and you tell me the madhab of Imam Malik says? Here's the hadith, brother. What are you following? Are you following Malik, who said himself, everybody's speech is put before Allah and His Messenger, and if it doesn't correspond, then you throw it out? And I tell you the Ma'soom said, and you tell me somebody who can make a mistake says, so what does he say about that? My answer to this is as follows. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. It is not permissible for a common person to abandon following the four Imams and take directly from the textual sources of Quran and Hadith, for the simple reason that this entails a great many conditions that have been clarified in the books of Usul. Moreover, these conditions are rarely met by the great scholars, especially in these last days, in which Islam has become a stranger just as it began a stranger. Ibn Uyayna said, the hadith are a source of error except for jurisprudence. What he means is that people other than the scholars might interpret a tradition based on an apparent meaning, and yet the hadith may have another interpretation based on some other hadith that clarifies the meaning, or some proof that remains hidden. After a long discussion, he remarks, as for their saying, how can you leave Quran verses and sound hadith and follow the Imams in their ijtihad, when they have a clear probability of error, whereas the Quran and the Hadith can't have error? His answer to them is as follows. Surely the following of our rightly guided Imams is not abandoning the Quranic verses or the sound Hadith. It is the very essence of adhering to them and taking our judgments from them. This is because the Quran has not come down to us except by the means of these very Imams, who are more worthy of following by virtue of being more knowledgeable than us in the sciences of abrogating and abrogated, absolute, conditional, equivocal, and clarifying, the probabilistic and plain, the circumstances surrounding their revelations and their various meanings, as well as their possible interpretations, various linguistics and philological considerations, not to mention the various other ancillary sciences involved in understanding the Quran needed. Also, they took all that from the students of the companions, who received their instruction from the companions themselves, who received their instructions from the lawgiver himself, may Allah grant him peace and safety, divinely protected from every mistake, who bore witness that the first three generations of Muslims would be ones of virtue and righteousness. Furthermore, the prophetic traditions have also reached us through their means, given that they were also more knowledgeable than those who came after them concerning the rigorously authenticated, sahih, the well-authenticated, hasan, the weak, da'if, and as well as the marfu', the mursal, the mutawatir, the ahad, the mu'dal, and the gharib transmissions. Thus, as far as this little band of men is concerned, there is only one of two possibilities. Either they are attributing ignorance to those imams whose knowledge is considered by consensus to have reached what is humanly possible of perfection and is witnessed in several generations by the truthful lawgiver, upon whom prayers and peace, or they are actually attributing misguidance and lack of deen to the imams who are all from the best generations by the testimony of the magnificent messenger himself. Surely it is not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts in the breast that go blind. As for their saying to the one who imitates Malik, we say to you Allah says, and you say Malik says, or Ibn Qasim or Khalil. What that means is Malik says based on his deep understanding of the word of Allah or the words of the messenger, or of those firmly adhering to the actions of the companions or of the tabi'een who clearly understood the word of Allah and the meaning of the followers. As for the one who leaves their leadership and says Allah said and His Messenger said, he has relied solely on his own understanding, despite the fact that he is incapable of having any precision in the verses and the hadith that he quotes, since he is unable even to provide chains of transmission with any authority, let alone that he lacks knowledge concerning the abrogated and the abrogated, the absolute and the conditional, the ambiguous and the clarifying, the apparent and the textual, the general and the specific, the dimensions of the Arabic, the cause of the revelation, the various linguistic considerations, and other various ancillary sciences needed. So consider for yourself which is preferable, the word of a follower who simply quotes the understanding of Malik, an imam by consensus, or the word of an ignoramus who said Allah said and His Messenger said, but it is not the sight that goes blind, but rather the hearts and the breast. Furthermore, know that the origin of this deviation is from the Zahiriyah who appeared in Andalusia, and whose power waxed for a period until Allah obliterated all traces of them, until this little band of men set about to revive their beliefs. Imam al-Barzuli said, the first one who ever attacked the Mudawwana, he's using Maliki sources because he's a Maliki in a Maliki country. But we could use the same, say Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmed, Imam Abu Hanifa, the same. But he's writing to primarily Malikis, that's why he's using that. So he says, if you consider the above-mentioned text, you will realize that the one who censors you from following the imams is truly a deviant. And I am using the word deviant to describe them only because the scholars before me have labeled this little band and their view as deviant. Moreover, you should know that those who condemn your adherence to the imams have been fully refuted by Muhammad al-Khadir bin Mayaba with the most piercing of refutations, and he himself called them in his book, The People of Deviation and Heterodoxy. He called his book Refuting the People of Deviation and Heterodoxy who attack the following of the imams of independent reasoning. And I used to have a copy, but I no longer do. So my brother, I seriously warn you from following the madhab of these people, and even from sitting in their company unless there is an absolute necessity, and certainly from listening to anything they have to say, because the scholars have declared their ideas deviant. Ibn al-Had says in his book, Al-Madkhal, Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz said, never give one whose heart is deviant access to your two ears, for surely you never know what may find fixity in you. I ask Allah to make you and me from those who listen to matters and follow the best of them. So that's his fatwa about that issue. And I just wanted to, clarify that that is the position of the Ummah for 1200 years. Right? Really, that's the position. And I ask anyone in this room to show me one imam before the 19th century who did not put the name, for the last 1200 years, who did not put the name of his imam after his name. Anyone. Just one. An imam in which there's consensus about him who did not say Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani al-Shafi'i, Qadi Iyad al-Maliki, Imam al-Tahawi al-Hanafi, Imam al-Jassas al-Hanafi. Right? Anyone. Imam Abdullah al-Haddad al-Shafi'i, Imam al-Haramain al-Shafi'i. Any one of them. Ibn Taymiyyah al-Hanbali, Imam al-Zahabi al-Hanbali, Ibn Kathir al-Hanbali, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali. Any one. Just one imam that didn't have that name attached to him. And you can't. So, I just think that's important for people. Inshallah, I'm going to get copies for everybody to take one of these.